Hey guys, my name's Crystal Kenny, and I'm in love with creating. All things artistic and imagination involved. I'm an American girl who chased her creative dreams all the way to Paris, France, making a living using photography. This podcast takes you inside the stories of all the artsy folks I've met along the way and gives you that extra push to discover your creative gifts. The desire to create is deeply inside each and every one of us, and I give you the tools and inspiration to find a new way of living a more creative life. This is La Vie Creative, the podcast. Claudine Hemingway is a descendant of famed writer Ernest Hemingway. We bumped into each other at a party and decided to team up and dive deep into French history, but with a twist, by bringing a spotlight to those lesser-known creatives in France. This is History with a Hemingway.
Welcome back to Paris History Avec Hemingway. Today we are talking about Vivian Maier. And if you haven't heard of her, you definitely want to check out her work. I'm a huge fan of hers as a photographer. There's an amazing exhibition on right now in Paris about her. And Claudine's going to tell us everything you need to know.
Yeah, she is an amazing photographer, as you mentioned, and her life is quite interesting. But sadly, that exhibit just closed. But it is always touring all over. It looks like there's going to be a Vivian Maier exhibition down near Bordeaux coming up. But I'll have all the links so you could keep track and follow it and see. But I also wanted to do this because her birthday was February 1st, 1926, which is just in a few days. And she's just such an interesting character. And if you haven't ever seen her photographs, go to my website. Some of her photos will just literally rock you to your core. They're just so stunning to see. But Vivian Maier herself, her mother was French. Her name was Marie Jassot. She was born in 1897 up in the Alps. She came to the United States. She followed her aunt here. And when she got here, she met Charles Maier. They married in New York. He was Austrian. And in 1926, she had Vivian. But right before that, in 1920, they had Charles Jr., a son. And so they were a happy little family for a few years. And in 1929, her parents separated, and she and her mother moved to New York, where she ended up staying with her French friend named Jeanne Bertrand. And they all decided to go back to France. Jeanne was actually an artist and a photographer. So many people think that she had a huge influence, of course, on Vivian's life to become a photographer. Sadly, there's a lot of things about Vivian's life that we don't know anything about, and we'll get to kind of why that is. But the three ladies returned to France. They stayed there from 1932 until 1938. They ended up coming back to the States just as World War II was really starting to, the talk of that was starting to spread. She came back to the U.S. Until 1950, where she returned back to France to deal with the inheritance on a property that had belonged to her aunt, but her mother basically got skipped over as far as the line of inheritance. So Vivian had to go there to help take care of that. She returned to the U.S., and that's where she took her first job as a nanny. So this is a lot of people call her the nanny photographer, and that's kind of what she did. She was a nanny, first job in 1951 in Southampton, New York. She worked with that family until 1956, when she moved to, you were a nanny. Could you imagine that? That's a long time. She moved to Chicago, where she worked with the Gensburg family, who she would stay close with until basically the end of her life. They had three boys, John, Lane, and Matthew, and they'll come back into our story here in a bit. But when she was there, she got her first camera in 1951, and she carried this camera with her everywhere. And it was one of those cameras that you held at your waist. And so you look down on it instead of holding it up to your eye. And so she was able to be kind of sneaky about her pictures. It wasn't like people didn't automatically notice. Like now we could be so sneaky with our iPhone, like pretend we're looking at something and we're really taking a picture of the cute guy at the table next to you.
Yeah.
And so they, she'd hold it down at her waist, but she took this camera with her everywhere. And so she would be, taking the boys out places. She would end up taking the camera everywhere, sometimes to the point where the boys would wander off. There was one time where one of the boys had fell and he was laying in the middle of the street. He fell off his bike and she basically just rushed over to take photos of him laying in the street and documenting this whole process. And the mother sees this and comes running out because the mother was afraid it was the dog got hit by a car.
Oh my God.
And it's really her son, that's laying there on the ground. But she would at times sometimes just wander off. She would just the kids would wander off on their own with different families, that the kids would be found by the police and they were like, you should not be leaving your nanny. And they're like, no, she left us. She just would see, I want to take a picture of that. But she, at the time when she was living with this family, she had her own bathroom. And so she used her bathroom as a dark room. And sadly, after she was out, after she left, when the boys got older, she's never developed her film again. And so this also is, the biggest thing about this story is how everything was kind of discovered, which we'll get to. And so she, at that time in 1959, because the thought is that she, had all this money from this property that she inherited that she sold. She, at that point, toured around the world. She had her, is it a Rolleiflex camera? Is that how you say it? Do you know?
Single reflex?
Yeah, and it's the one that she held at her waist. So she had her, her second good camera. She traveled to Asia, Europe, and the Middle East, as well as Canada. And at this point, she did stop in Paris. And so you could see some really amazing photos that I'll put on my website that she did there. She left all her stuff at the time with the Gensburg family. And she had a lot of stuff. She was a pack rat. She literally saved every single scrap of paper, everything. She at times would save, with one family she lived with, she saved newspapers to the point that they were stacked up shoulder length stacks of
Oh no,
paper.
she was a hoarder.
She was a hoarder, and she, at parts of the floor in the attic space that she lived in, were literally warped because of all of the newspapers.
Oh my God, that's so sad.
And she would cut things out of them, cut these stories out of them, put them in notebooks that she saved. And for a short period of time, she worked as a housekeeper for Phil Donahue. And for all the kids out there, he used to be had a very popular afternoon TV show, I think long before Oprah.
You worked for Phil Donahue?
He worked for Phil Donahue for a short period of time. And he, there's a documentary. This is kind of a lot of stuff we know about her is because it's an amazing documentary. But he's interviewed in the documentary and he just says, oh, I do, she was there for a few months, but I do remember her always taking photos. She was always taking photos. When she, when she left the living with the Gensburgs, that's when she stopped, sadly, developing any of her film. She would basically then, as we said, she was a hoarder and a pack rat, and she saved everything. And this is kind of how we discovered all of these things later. But she, would save, she would have stacks and stacks of luggage filled with all sorts of random things, like former tickets from, dry cleaning. She would also use different names. She would spell Maier, which is Maier. She would spell it every form of Maier, Meier, every form you could ever think of. She used different names. So it all made it very difficult for us to be able to know who she was, because she just kind of lived this kind of unknown life, but always changing everything.
That's so interesting.
Yeah, which makes it really interesting, and you definitely should check out the first documentary. There's a couple of them that have been made about her, but the major one is you definitely should see. But she started, as she took these different jobs, she would get hired and she'd say, okay, well, I have a lot of boxes that I need to bring. And she had over 200 boxes of stuff. She, this one family she went to, they were like, oh, that's fine. We have a 2.5 car garage. And then basically after all of her stuff was moved, they basically had a 1.5 car garage.
Oh my God. That's wow.
But she would move it from place to place, which you can't, we hate moving and thinking of all of that, having to move that every time. I don't even know how that was even.
So she would drag all her junk everywhere.
She would drag all her junk, but she was taking photos all the time, but she would make audio tapes, like recording sometimes with the kids, sometimes just talking about things that she was seeing. She also would make movies. And so the exhibition that they had at the Musée de Luxembourg was stunning, amazing. It was like every time I walked by it, there was always lines of people waiting to go see it. They had even some of the movies, so I think you could see some of them online that you could be able to. They have a vivianmaier.com where you could see a lot of the stuff about her story and a lot of her photos. But she would just basically take all of this stuff in tow to each family she moved to, and God only knows how much she accumulated with each move.
I think the families would let her bring all that junk.
Yeah. And so some of the families, when you watch the documentary, some of the families basically, like the Gensburg boys, they basically called her their second mom till she died. And then there's one family, there's this one young girl that basically was like, she tortured me. She was horrible. She was mean. They say that she walked she had this very funny stomping walk that somebody actually closely related to the Nazi march.
Oh my, what?
And so in the way she dressed, because they do she saved every pair of shoes. They said that she dressed like basically she was working in a factory in the 50s is how she kind of dressed. Very chunky shoes and a hat. And the exhibit they had at the Luxembourg, they had one of her hats there. But she, as a photographer, was amazing because she basically would do these self-portraits of her, in mirrors. She was really big into taking photos with her shadow. And so after I saw that and I walked through the Jardin de Luxembourg, I was like, I'm getting all Vivian Maier and taking pictures of the ground with my shadow.
I love it. You were inspired.
I was inspired by Vivian, but her photos are just absolutely astounding and amazing to go see. And I don't think you went to go see the exhibit, did you? I don't think you had time, but it was pretty amazing to see. In 1975, she lost her mother. And in 1977, her brother died in a psychiatric hospital. When her parents separated in 1929, after that, as far as we know, she never saw her brother again. Her brother went to go live with her father's parents, and she left to go live with her mother. So we don't think that she ever saw her brother or her father again. And so it's very sad. So she worked as a nanny for 50 years. She worked into the early 2000s. And as she got older, when she couldn't work anymore, and she basically was completely, destitute, had no money, the Gensburg boys helped find her an apartment. They paid for her apartment. They paid for a storage unit for her to keep all of her stuff in, but they didn't know that she had a second storage unit. And so this is how we find out who she is. So in 2007, a gentleman named John Maloof, who was a young real estate investor living in Chicago, he had bought this home, and he wanted to write a book about the history in the area where his home was, and he needed some photos, some period photos of the time. And across the street from where he bought his house was a small little auction company. And so he went over there and saw there was all this stuff that was taken out of a storage unit. And so he saw this box, and it was said to be filled with photographs and negatives and rolls of film. And so he basically was like, okay, I'm going to bid on the biggest one. And it was a big, huge silver trunk. And so he ended up bidding, and he won it for $380. And then he took it home, and he started looking through, and it was like, oh, well, none of these photos will really help me. But then he started looking through the stuff and was started to look at the negatives, and was like, these photos are amazing. Who is this? And he found a slip of paper with her name in. This was 2007. He Googled it. He looked for hours and hours and hours and literally found nothing. And so he kept going through the boxes and kept looking at the negatives. And then he started to upload these and put them on Flickr, which I don't even think is a thing anymore. And in 2007. And so he started uploading them that next summer in 2008. And as he uploaded them to to Flickr, they like instantly became this like viral obsession.
Oh,
And people saw these pictures, and he was updating them and uploading them like as many as he could a day, and people were just obsessed with them. So he kept wanting to find out more of who she was. He also at that point decided to go find the other boxes that he didn't bid on. He found 3 other buyers that had also purchased these, and he got all these boxes back. And some of them, as we were saying, they had her shoes in it. They had stacks and stacks of shoe repair tags, and from the dry cleaner, and just any, like, literally she saved everything.
wow. That's
Which,
so weird.
when we have people like this, you call hoarders, and Hemingway was the same way. And now it's like, we're kind of glad we have all that stuff.
Yeah, I mean, in the cases of those people, we like their stuff.
Exactly. Yeah. And so he, he kept looking into this, and he kept amassing all this stuff. And it got to the point that he actually had to have a company basically spend 24 hours a day doing this. He ended up finding over 100,000 negatives,
Wow.
700 color film that had never been developed, 2,000 black and white that had
Wow.
never been developed. So he had to get all of these done. And so he kept searching for these things. And so he kept finding this stuff. And then he kept Googling her. And in 2009 is when Vivian died. So as he first found all this stuff, she was alive.
Ah,
He had fallen on the ice one day and was badly injured, and she was taken to the hospital. And at that point, they were like, she needs to be in a home. And so the Gensburg boys paid for that, took care of her. And then she died in 2009. But when John Maloof bought her trunk in 2007, there was no information. She basically didn't exist on the internet. He had no idea who she was. So she died, and a few months after she died, he came across her obituary. And that's when he found the name of the Gensburg boys. So he reached out to them, and they said, we didn't even know anything about this other storage unit. We have a storage unit that we pay for that is literally filled to the ceiling of boxes of stuff. We're going to go through it and get rid of most of it, but it's totally up to you if you want to come. If there's things that we don't want that you want, you could have it. Whatever you want.
whoa. So this guy basically made her famous.
He basically like created her life. So, and thankfully, because it's pretty amazing, except for maybe there's she forced his child down and choked her to eat. But most every family story that she was her nanny, they say she was a little bit odd as far as like she didn't let people in, but they don't have any stories like that.
Huh.
So, I mean, we don't know, but if they were all saying really horrible things about her, then that'd be different. But
Yeah.
so he ended up going, and he got all of this stuff, and then he started to reconstruct her life. So he started putting all these things together, and he found different names. And of course, because she used different names all the time, it made it hard. But then he started finding the names of the people she nannied for. And so he started calling them and contacting them. He ended up also going to France, to this little village where she had lived and her mother was from, and ended up finding people that had known her at one time. So he started to like piece all of these different parts of her life back together. And in January of 2011, he held a small exhibit at the Chicago Cultural Center. And it was just this little tiny place. And he basically had all of these, photos that she had created hung on the wall. And they literally were turning thousands of people away. Like, this little tiny cultural center didn't know what hit them. And then he was like, okay, this is really something going on. So that is when he, in 2013, decided to, he had done a documentary, and it was called Finding Vivian Maier. It's kind of the first one. You could find it on Amazon. You could find it a lot of different places, but came out. He did it with Fred Siskel, who was the son of the famous film critic Siskel. And so he did this documentary, and it just follows him basically as we discover everything about her that we know and her photos. In that same year, there was a photographer and a lawyer. He was a photographer first, and then he became a lawyer named David C. Deal. He decided to file a case against John Maloof because John, she had no children. They didn't know of anybody in her family. They couldn't find anybody. John Maloof had hired a genealogist to search out her family to see who it was that's the heir to her stuff, to see, like, does he need to contact her because he's basically, doing all of this stuff. But this David C. Deal guy thought, well, he's making money on this. But John Maloof had spent thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars because he was getting all of her film
Developed.
developed. He was hiring people to finally upload and do the negative. So he was putting a ton of money into this, but it was basically just because he became obsessed in her story and wanted to discover who she was. So this David Deal guy took him to court. David Deal also hired a genealogist and found another family member of hers and contacted her. And this gal was like, I don't even know who you're talking about. I've never even heard about her. And so the whole thing ended up getting settled, and it's all done. And Maloof created the Vivian Maier Foundation. He's basically the keeper of her flame. That he is the one that, and when you see the exhibit, everything on there says it's, by the Vivian Maier Foundation. And he's the one that basically gets her story out there. The documentary came out in 2013. And I remember my friend Philip he went to go see it. When it was released in March of 2013. And I remember him calling me afterwards and telling me about it and how her story just like completely just rocked him to the core, because she would be up there with some of the greatest photographers ever. And nobody ever knew her, and nobody until now and in her life. But I don't think she ever took these photos for anybody to see, because after those first few years, she never developed anything.
Yeah, because she didn't have any money.
She didn't have any money. And so I think it was just basically the love of just taking a picture, and it was way back when they weren't digital. You didn't know what it looked like.
It was a hobby because she was a nanny, but she was actually a really great artist.
Yeah, it was just a hobby. And so I remember him telling me about it. And then I saw the documentary not long after that, because he was just like, it stayed with him for like days. Sadly, it's been 3 years now in February that I lost my friend Philip to cancer, and he was only 33 years old. So when I saw this and I saw that it was there, like, I really wanted to see her photographs, but I also was just like, it made me think of him the whole time. And I felt like I was seeing it for him to go see this exhibition. But it's all done. I mean, the exhibition, if you could go see it, and I will keep an eye on and share anytime I see on social media when there's an exhibit of her work. Some of the photos, it's amazing, because a lot of them you see where she really focused on people's hands. She also focused a lot on people's feet and legs. She would capture like the political times at that time, of news of the day. There's really amazing photographs of these, very 50s women with their gloves and their little hats, standing there reading the front page of the newspaper. And then she also would like all different scenes of life, like from the the well-heeled people of Chicago, New York, walking down the street to, sometimes even death. There's a photo of a dead horse in the street, it's just, and it's all black and white. She would take pictures of like the stuff that's in a garbage can, including like a baby doll. But the way like her photos, I really, really wish you would have seen them in person, because I think you would have just been just amazed by it. It's just so great. There's one photo that I'll share of this little girl, and she's wearing this like, navy, it's all black and white, so a dark striped t-shirt. She has her arms crossed, and her face and her arms are really dirty, and her eyes look like they're filled up with tears. And then she's wearing this watch that looks like it's her father's watch or something. Like, it's too big for her. But you look at her and she's this little girl, but you look at her and she doesn't look little. Like, she looks like she's probably in her 40s, in her, like, her eyes, like what she has to see and what she's seeing in her life, and what you look at when you see, you're like, I'm not looking, she should be a little girl, but I'm
Yeah.
looking at this little girl, and she's probably had to go through more. And it was a photo taken, I think it was in like 1959 in New York, it said. And it
Wow.
was, I stood there for like 10 minutes looking at this photo, and like at one point, like almost crying, because it was like, it was just one of the most amazing photographs I've ever seen. And Vivian would just walk around and capture these things. And it's just, she part of the thing, John Maloof, at the time when he was first uncovering all this, he reached out to a lot of the major museums, like, the MoMA and all of these different ones, saying, hey, I've got these photos. This is this amazing collection. I think a museum needs to be involved in this, because he also wanted the help. And all of them were like, no, thanks. And there's still, even today, because, and you'll understand this as a photographer, that because she died and these things were never developed, a lot of the bigger institutions they are leery of the whole thing, because now they're getting developed and the photos that are being shown are chosen by somebody other than the artist.
Yeah.
So was this her intention? Did she have any, like, there was even a talk in the documentary of like, did she ever have intention of these being shown? But at one point they did find these letters that she had, when she was in France in the village, she had talked to the guy that developed photos when she was a child, and said, there's a letter that says, can you develop these photos? I want them on this kind of paper. I want them da, 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 da. So she did have intention of having these done nicely.
Yeah.
But some people say in the higher echelons of the art world, like, well, maybe those photos that they chose to show at the Luxembourg weren't her intention. So this is somebody else interpreting what she did.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
But
It's a delicate thing.
It's a delicate thing. And it is, it's the same thing. Like, but then I look at, now we have things like Picasso, and Picasso sometimes would jot down something on a pizza receipt or on a napkin, and now those sell for millions of dollars. So he didn't intend for that to be art. He just sat there and jotted something down and then left it sitting on the table.
Yeah.
So, and those things go for millions of dollars, but now there's a lot of the, upper elite people that are like, well, maybe this wasn't her intention. Maybe she didn't want, but it's also, she didn't afford to.
Yeah, she didn't have the money.
And I don't think that she thought of herself as like, all of a sudden, I'm just going to, I'm going to set up and take these photos, and then all of a sudden I'm going to make my own exhibition. Like, I don't think, but when you look at these, like when you see, the greatest photographers, Doisseau and all of those guys, her photos are up there. Her photos could sit alongside some of those greatest photographers that we know of.
Yeah, no, and it's crazy because she didn't have like that formal background. It was just basically a hobby. And now, I mean, I wonder what she would think about her stuff being shown everywhere.
I know, but it's like, it's so, when you think of like that, this was all discovered in 2007, and she lived for 2 years after that. Like,
yeah,
she was just like completely, off the grid,
yeah.
because of how she lived her life too. And it's kind of like, what if he had found her in 2007 and said, what do you want to do with all these photos? But she could have also been like, forget you. Those are my photos. You can't have them. And then that would have been it. And we never would have known.
Yeah, exactly. No, but I'm glad that he cared so much to do that.
Yeah, it's kind of a hard, I mean, and you kind of, when you know her story and then you go and see the exhibition, you just constantly have that in the back of your head. And it's just kind of this very bittersweet, kind of heartbreaking story, and she has these other photos that was like of a father and son. And I think it was in New York, and they had gone to the zoo or a carnival or something. And he's holding a balloon, and there's a series of different photographs. And the first one, basically the way she took it, the balloon was blocking the father and the son's face.
Yeah.
And then you see it going, and then you just think like, is this, the dad took a day off of work and he's taking his young son to the zoo? Or is it, he's divorced and this is his day that he gets his son? Or, you just think about all of these things when you see these photos. And, honestly, I mean, you know how much I love art, but sometimes photographs, I'm like, yeah, whatever. Like, but this one was one that, definitely take the time and search her out, check out the links, to her website, and even find the documentary, because it is her work alone is pretty astounding.
Yeah, I think it's still on, so maybe I can see it when I'm back. I don't remember.
It just closed. It closed. I think it was closing January 9th.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm see her somewhere else in the world, but you guys check out her work online. If you haven't heard of her already, she's definitely worth checking out. And I'm sure Claudine will put stuff on her website, so head over to her website as well. And don't forget to join Claudine for her live virtual tours of Paris every Sunday. You can check out more information on her website, ClaudineHemingway.com. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you for listening to Paris History Avec a Hemingway. If you want to find out some more, you could always find me on my Instagram page, Claudine Bleu Blanc Rouge, and that's BLEU, as in the French way to spell it. And each day I post a daily history lesson about a person or a place or something in Paris, or it's lots of fun facts. And then also at ClaudineHemingway.com, where you can also sign up for my newsletter there.